I talk too fast, just let me know.
What?
Exactly. So the in-service objective, this training will address the topic of elder abuse, neglect, and exploitation. And after completing this session, employees will be able to define elder abuse, list the major forms of elder abuse, name signs and symptoms of elder abuse, understand possible contributing factors of elder abuse, the employee role in elder abuse reporting and investigation, and the Arbors policies according to the abuse reporting and investigation policy plan and procedure for resident safety and residents' rights. So the first section, it says, what is elder abuse? Elder abuse can be defined as the mistreatment of an older person. These individuals are generally frail and most often are unable to help themselves, requiring assistance with most ADLs and IADLs. Abuse includes, but is not limited to, the willful infliction of physical pain, injury, mental anguish, sexual statements, inappropriate touching, forced sexual activity, harassment, threatening statements, yelling, derogatory or racial statements, unexplained bruises, welts, burns, fractures, and lacerations. Major forms of abuse and signs and symptoms of elder abuse. The first we're going to talk about is neglect. Neglect refers to the withholding of services from an elderly person who is unable to provide for him or herself the services necessary to maintain physical or mental health. Types of neglect will include intentional and unintentional. Signs of neglect can include poor hygiene, weight loss, dehydration, and medications not being administered to the elder. Physical abuse refers to the use of physical force that results in the physical injury and or pain of another individual. These forms of abuse include physical, which are hitting, slapping, pinching, kicking, shoving, shaking, or restraining someone against their will. Signs of physical abuse include bruises, black eyes, new injuries, welts, rope marks, burns, noticeable difference in the resident's mood after care has been provided. So you can tell a lot by the way that they emotionally react to somebody as well. Psychological and emotional abuse refers to the mental anguish, distress, and fear without a physical action. This form of abuse is harder to recognize and is less frequently reported. Types of these psychological and emotional abuse will include insulting, threatening, humiliating, or screaming at the individual. Signs of psychological and emotional abuse will be being fearful, upset, or agitated while care is being provided, not talking or talking very slowly, showing childish behavior such as thumb sucking or rocking back and forth. And then we're going to move into sexual abuse. So sexual abuse refers to the unwelcome sexual advances and conduct of any kind. While sexual abuse does occur, it is much less common than other types of elder abuse. Signs of sexual abuse can include bruising around the genitals and breasts, vaginal or rectal bleeding, stained underclothing or bedding, and an elder's report of being sexually assaulted. And lastly, we're going to talk about financial exploitation. Yes, it is. This whole packet. It refers to the illegal or improper use of individuals' money or property without consent. Financial exploitation is the third most common form of elder abuse. Types of this financial exploitation can include forged signatures, a disappearance of valuables, illegal withdrawal from funds from a bank account. And what I want you to also note is you really do want to pay attention to what a resident is reporting, as well as any suspicious behavior that they're exhibiting, whether it's coming from the family member or the staff member that they're discussing with you. You want to pay attention to the way that they're interacting with that individual as well. Sometimes when we can't verbalize things, we actually will show physical signs prior to being able to voice it. Contributing factors to elder abuse. Elder abuse is never an excusable offense.
Can you give us an example of what a physical sign might be?
As far as them themselves being physically assaulted, or what they might show.
What they might show.
So just fearfulness, timidness, they might become very quiet, they might want to remove themselves from the area when that particular individual is there. It might also be a diminish in eye contact. They might not look the person right in the face, they might actually turn away. Anything that shows they're trying to refrain from interacting from that individual. They don't generally want to get closer, they want to get further away as best as possible. factors to elder abuse. It says that it is never an excusable offense, however, there are factors that can contribute to its occurrence. Knowing what these factors are will help us in the future be better able to identify and report a situation in which abuse is more likely to occur. Types of contributing factors include caregiver stress. This can be a family or a friend. And most often it's because they do not have the training or the experience on how to work with an elder and are more than likely to become frustrated. There's also mental and physical conditions of the elder. As we know, as the elder moves along in their progression and is unable to do things for themselves and their need to depend on their caretaker for more help. Obviously, the level of stress raises for that caregiver, and also some resentment might come along with that. Family history of violence. Depending on how the caregiver's family responds to a stressful event will determine how they themselves will react. And at that point, that violence might come out in yelling, or maybe not intentionally being neglectful, but just feeling tired and wanting to create space. So you gotta also recognize it can be the family history that's impacting that caregiver. Caregiver's personal affairs. It's possible for a caregiver to have their own mental health disorder, or alcoholism, or drug addiction, or just poor coping skills. You're not generally trained to be taking care of your parent, and sometimes the stress of doing so can manifest in different ways. Types of abusive relationships. There can be resident-to-resident abuse, employee, volunteer, or consultant to resident, and it can also be visitor and family to resident. Moving on to number 5, so this is your role. Employee role in elder abuse reporting and investigation. A CNA, or in our building RCAs, play an important role when dealing with cases of suspected abuse and neglect among residents in the community. Due to the CNAs working closely and hands-on with the residents on a day-to-day basis, you're our eyes and ears first and foremost. So it's important for you to listen to the resident, know the factors that may increase the possibility of elder abuse, which is what we just discussed. Learning the signs of elder abuse, note changes in the resident's behavior, stay objective when documenting. So we just want the facts. We don't want you to add any of your own personal content into that. We just want you to state exactly what the scenario was and be as objective as possible, and report it immediately to your supervisor. If there's suspected or witnessed abuse, it should be reported immediately to the nurse in charge or the executive director. Reports will be kept anonymous, and even if it is suspected and witnessed and it is not reported, the staff member will be subjected to disciplinary action. Again, if you see something, say something. You are our eyes and ears. It's important. We all play an important role in that, especially you as RCAs. You're with them around the clock, and we take it seriously. So if it's not reported and we recognize that, there will be disciplinary action in the aftermath. Employees can help prevent abuse and neglect by listening to residents and caregivers, reporting when abuse or neglect is suspected, and teaching residents and caregivers how to detect abuse and neglect. So, like I said, you all got that handout for the Arbors policy itself. I did go over it briefly during that outline. So it's the last 2 pages. Okay, and like I said, I outlined everything as far as how you report, when you report, why you would report. So that last page is for you to keep and be able to reference back to. Okay, and that last page I'm going to need you to sign and give to me so we can put it into your file so that we're all aware and we know that you have gone through the training for that piece. And if anybody's missing that, I can give you another piece. At the end, I can make a photocopy for you. What we're going to do now is we're going to turn to the elder abuse and neglect quiz, and we're going to do that together. Okay? This is another one. This is an extra, yep. And like I said, if anybody's missing a copy of the policy and procedure portion, I can get that to you after. All right, we ready? We're going to start with question number 1. I like group activity, so if you know the answer, say it out for me, okay? The major difference between abuse and neglect is that A, neglect is not always deliberate, B, neglect is never deliberate, C, neglect never requires reporting, or D, abuse is not deliberate? What do we think number 1 is? The major difference between abuse and neglect is that neglect is not always deliberate, neglect is never deliberate, it never requires reporting, or abuse is not deliberate. What do we think? I got A, I got D. I'm not even looking at my own. I told you. No, hold on. It is A. It is A. Neglect is not always deliberate. Again, it can be intentional and unintentional. Number 2, which best explains what elder abuse is? Not taking care of an elderly person, not taking an elderly person to church, mistreating an elderly person, being stressed as a caregiver, and not giving in to every request of the elderly resident. Which best explains? Nope, it's not A. B. It's okay. Mistreating an elderly person is B. Number 2 is B. Number 3, which of the following is not a factor in elder abuse?
Start already?
322 is point to call 8322.
If the family lives in the city or suburbs, caregiver stress,
Be right there.
family history of violence, or caregiver personality problems. Which of the following is not a factor? It is A. Yep. Doesn't matter where you live, it can happen anywhere. Does not matter. Number 4, you suspect abuse of an elderly resident. What do? Call the authorities, tell the family to stop or they'll be reported. Ask resident what they did wrong, or report your suspicions to your supervisor according to facility policy. D is correct. Number 5, when abuse occurs, the victim is usually willing to accept help, tends to blame the abuser and not themselves, often feels ashamed and powerless, rarely fears retaliation and further mistreatment. Number 5 is C. And you have to remember too, the clients that we're working with, they're from that era where it happens but you don't talk about it. They keep it within their own homes, they keep it within their families. So that's why it's important to look for other signs and symptoms as far as behaviors go, because they're not always going to want to verbalize it. Number 6, which of the following is the most common form of elder abuse? Is it A, A, physical, B, psychological, C, neglect, or D, sexual assault? C, neglect. Number 7.
Kathy?
Elder abuse victims have the right to refuse help when offered. Must always
Can
accept
you
help whether
please
they
come
like
to
it or not.
322?
Will usually report abuse whenever it occurs, or typically has high self-esteem. A. Yeah. Everybody together so far? All right, number 8, true or false? Elders who are in poor health and are more dependent on family and friends for support are more likely to be abused than elders in better health. What do we think? True. Remember, as the need for more assistance, as the need for more dependability on a family member, especially somebody who's not trained on how to assist them appropriately, as they decline, their stress will rise, and that's where you can see some of that neglect occur as well as abuse overall. Number 9, elder abuse is generally underreported, is easy to identify and define, it almost never involves family members, or is usually the fault of the victim. A. Number 10, which of the following is not likely a sign of elder abuse? Bruising around the genitals, chest pain, marks around the wrist, a statement by the elder that his son slaps him. B, chest pain. Number 11, mandated reporters of abuse include nurses, therapists, executive director of the assisted living, or all of the above. All of the above. Yeah. You see something, say something. You are the eyes and ears, remember that. Number 12, which of the following is true about reporting elder abuse to your supervisor? A, you should report physical abuse only if you see someone hit the patient. B, you should always get the resident's permission before reporting suspicions of abuse. C, you should immediately report suspicions of elder abuse to your supervisor. And D, you should give the family an opportunity to stop the abuse and report your suspicions if they don't.
C.
It is C. And last but not least, number 13, true or false? It is very common for elder abuse to be kept a secret within the family.
True.
Very true. All right. Does anybody have any questions? Any concerns? Anything they'd like me to elaborate on? No? We think we're okay? All right. Well, thank you very much for joining me this afternoon. I know it's kind of a heavy topic. Hopefully, I made it as easy as possible for you to go through with me. Just make sure your names and the date is on the top of that quiz. Make sure your name and your date is on the second page of that policy. And you guys can just pass them on to me. Thank you very much, everybody. Thank you.